The town of Portage la Prairie sat under a sky that was always a little too gray. It wasn't the kind of gray that promised rain. It was the color of old television static, a flat and lifeless expanse that seemed to suck the very vibrancy out of the world below. Fields of wheat, which should have been golden and full of life, instead looked pale and brittle, swaying not with the wind, but with a strange, rhythmic shudder. The air hung thick and heavy, carrying a low, almost imperceptible hum. It was a sound you felt more than heard, a vibration that worked its way into your bones and made your teeth ache. This was the world as Elias knew it, a place where silence was a memory and the sun was a stranger. Elias worked the late shift at the town's only radio station, a small, isolated building on the edge of the endless fields. He was a man hollowed out by loneliness, his reflection in the studio glass showing a stranger with tired eyes and a frame that seemed to shrink a little more each day. He'd come here seeking quiet, a place to escape the noise of his past, but he'd found something far more unsettling. The hum of the prairie was a constant companion, a presence that filled the empty spaces in his life with a creeping dread. He felt like he was living inside a photograph that was slowly fading, the colors washing out until only the gray remained. He often wondered if he was the only one who noticed. The radio station was his sanctuary and his prison. He was surrounded by technology, but it was all old, analog, and temperamental. The mixing board was a labyrinth of dusty knobs and flickering lights. The reel-to-reel players groaned like old men, and the microphone seemed to absorb his voice without ever truly broadcasting it. At night, when the rest of the town was asleep, the hum grew louder. It would seep through the walls, mingling with the static between stations, creating strange, phantom whispers that danced at the edge of his hearing. He would spend hours adjusting frequencies, trying to find a clear signal, but all he found was more of the same oppressive, empty noise. He tried to talk about it once. He mentioned the hum to Mrs. Gable at the grocery store, a woman whose family had lived in Portage la Prairie for generations. She just smiled, a tight, vacant expression that didn't reach her eyes. "That's just the prairie, dear," she had said, her voice as flat as the horizon. "You get used to it." But Elias knew it wasn't just the prairie. It was something else, something hidden just beneath the surface of their quiet, predictable lives. It was an itch he couldn't scratch, a question without an answer, and it was slowly, methodically, driving him mad. The town wasn't just quiet, it was muted. One Tuesday night, something changed. The hum didn't just get louder, it shifted in pitch, becoming a sharp, jarring tone that made Elias's fillings ache. The lights in the studio flickered violently, and the needles on the VU meters slammed into the red, quivering as if in fear. Elias froze, his hand hovering over a dial. He had never experienced a surge like this before. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The lights steadied, the hum returned to its usual low thrum. But the silence in between was the most terrifying thing he had ever experienced. It was a void, absolute and complete. He tried to dismiss it as a power fluctuation, a common occurrence in the aging infrastructure of the town. But a cold knot of fear had tied itself in his stomach. He felt watched. Glancing at the security monitor, a small black and white screen showing the empty gravel lot outside, he saw something that made him stop breathing. For a split second, a figure stood by the station's front door. It was tall and impossibly thin, its limbs long and jointed at odd angles. It had no discernible features, just a shimmering, distorted silhouette, like heat rising from asphalt. Then, it was gone. Elias blinked, rubbing his eyes, convinced he was hallucinating from lack of sleep. He spent the rest of his shift on edge, jumping at every creak of the old building. He replayed the security footage over and over, but the glitch was gone. The recording showed nothing but the empty lot, the pale wheat fields swaying rhythmically in the distance. Was he losing his mind? The line between reality and the paranoid fantasies fueled by his isolation was becoming dangerously blurred. He started seeing things in the periphery of his vision, flickering shapes in the reflection of the studio glass. A momentary distortion in the pattern of the wallpaper, a twitch in the shadows that wasn't his own. The world was glitching, and he was the only one who seemed to notice. When his shift ended, he drove home through the silent streets, the gray dawn breaking over the flat landscape. The town was a perfect diorama, every house neat, every lawn manicured, but it felt wrong. It was too perfect. He noticed that the cars parked on the street were all the same model and color, a detail he had somehow missed before. The mailboxes were all identical, spaced at exact intervals. It was as if someone had built a town from a limited set of assets. The realization hit him not like a lightning bolt, but like a slow, creeping tide of ice water. This wasn't just a town, it was a stage, and the performance was about to begin. The next day, Elias decided to test his theory. He drove to the edge of town, past the last house and the final perfectly spaced mailbox. He kept driving, the gravel road stretching out before him into the pale, static-filled horizon. He drove for what felt like hours, but the landscape never changed. The same brittle wheat fields rolled by, the same low hum vibrated through the car. The town was supposed to be small, surrounded by other communities, but he saw no other signs of life. He checked his GPS, but the screen was just a mess of scrambled pixels, displaying the words, "no signal." He was in a loop, a repeating pattern of gray sky and pale earth. He pulled over, the silence of the car a stark contrast to the ever-present hum outside. He got out and walked into the field. The wheat wasn't brittle, it was plastic. He ran his hand over a stalk, and it felt smooth and cold, without the slightest give. He pulled one from the ground and it came out with a soft pop, revealing not roots but a clean, manufactured base designed to be plugged into the soil. It was all fake, the sky, the fields, the town. He looked up at the gray expanse and for the first time, he saw the seams. Faint, grid-like lines were etched across the sky like the pixels of a low-resolution screen. A new kind of fear washed over him, colder and deeper than anything he had felt before. This wasn't a haunting, it was a simulation. He was a rat in a meticulously constructed maze. But who were the scientists? Who had built this place? He thought of the figure on the security monitor, the shimmering, distorted shape. Were they the architects? The janitors of his prison? He suddenly felt incredibly small, a piece of data in an incomprehensible experiment. His loneliness wasn't just a feeling, it was a fundamental truth of his existence. He was utterly, completely, and irrevocably alone in this artificial world. He ran back to his car and sped back toward Portage la Prairie, a desperate plan forming in his mind. If the world was a program, then the radio station was his access point. The hum, the static, the whispers, they weren't just noise, they were the sound of the machine, the ghost in the code. He had to get back. He had to find a way to communicate, to send a message out. Or maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to break it. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, as the perfectly replicated houses of his fake hometown came back into view. He was no longer just a resident. He was a bug in the system. Elias burst into the radio station, the setting sun casting long, distorted shadows across the room. He didn't bother with the lights. He went straight for the main transmitter, a massive beast of vacuum tubes and copper wiring that hummed in harmony with the prairie. He had always been afraid of it, of the raw power it contained. Now, it was his only hope. He started patching cables, rerouting signals, and overriding safety protocols. He was turning the station's broadcast antenna into a weapon, a tool to scream back at the silent gods who watched him from beyond the gray sky. He was going to send a signal so powerful it would either break the simulation or fry him in the process. As he worked, the hum intensified, the whispers in the static growing into clear, distinct voices. They weren't human. They were a chorus of clicks, whistles, and chimes, a language of pure data. They were the architects speaking to each other through the code of his reality. He could hear them discussing anomalies, referencing his own erratic behavior. They called him the variable, They were observing his response to isolation, to the carefully controlled stimuli of his environment. His entire life, his pain, his loneliness. It was all just data for their experiment. Rage, pure and hot, burned through his fear. He was not a variable. He was a man. He found the master broadcast switch and slammed his hand down on it. A wave of energy surged through the station, and the world outside the window dissolved into a shower of digital rain. The plastic wheat, the fake houses, the gray sky, it all melted away, revealing the truth. He was not in a field. He was in a small, sterile white pod, suspended in a vast, dark space filled with millions of other identical pods. Wires and tubes snaked from his body, connecting him to the machine. The hum was the sound of the system that kept him alive, dreaming his simulated life in Portage la Prairie. His broadcast had not broken the simulation, it had only granted him a moment of clarity. As his vision flickered, the program rebooting around him, he saw the other pods. He saw the faces of Mrs. Gable, of the mailman, of every person he had ever known. Each one dreaming their own lonely loop, inside their own white prison. He wasn't alone after all. He was part of a chorus of silent screams, a ghost in a machine full of them. As the gray sky of Portage la Prairie reformed above him, the hum settling back into its familiar rhythm, Elias closed his eyes. He had lost, but he had also won. He knew the truth, and in the static that filled his ears, he began to whisper back,